During high school, we had a project to write a report on the history of the neighborhood that we lived in. When I researched my neighborhood, I discovered that my address was on a block that was not directly connected to any of the districts or titled neighborhoods that surrounded it. Basically, it was a part of a little pocket of space that was not attached to any sort of local identity by name. I took that to mean I could choose which bordering neighborhood I wanted to work on. The most interesting at the time was the neighborhood that was known as the Junction. I don't recall all of the details from this project, but I do remember this sort of stirring feeling of being connected to a physical place. The Junction was the site of my first lesson in gentrification. It got me interested in the cyclical nature of urban environments. Like at the corner of Dundas West and Keele Street, there's remains a building that was built at the turn of the 19th century as a bank. Then, at that time, it was a money mart. Now it's up for lease. The relationship to location, this sort of relationship to location became a recurring theme in my practice as a young adult. The Junction neighborhood was a town in its own right, until it became amalgamated with the city of Toronto, a place of connections, an intersection of trade and transportation. The remains of some of those industries still exist, and that early industrial identity persisted in the area for years. Last year, when I was trying to reconcile my material investigations and this interest in time, my mentor suggested looking back into my old work and influences to delve into like literal historical materials and ephemera. I made a visit to the Toronto Archives, specifically looking for documents that were related to the Junction as a site of this sort of early influence. One of the documents that I accessed was a roll of microfilm. It was one of the Toronto fire insurance plans for the town of West Toronto, which is now the Junction neighborhood. These maps were prepared for and leased to insurance companies. They were used to communicate building sizes and their construction materials in order to determine potential risk factors for those areas. The maps were frequently updated to record changes made to the original condition of the place, like as buildings burned down, that were torn down or renovated, or where new development was made. When minor corrections were necessary, revisions were printed and distributed to the agents to paste over these existing maps, sometimes resulting in multiple layers of plans with having the same date, but revisions were from different times. These maps detailed all of the different materials that were present within a landscape. This landscape that was like both familiar and strikingly different from the one that I remembered from my childhood. What was surprising was that as I got toward the end of this role, included as a part of the Junction was the block that I grew up on. And while this is totally a coincidence, there was such a visceral experience that I felt like it brought me back kind of full circle into that moment of being a teenager and that really early influence. Before leaving the archive library, I looked at my old address on Google Earth, like Google Street View, to compare it to the insurance map that I was looking at. My house hadn't been built yet, and when the insurance map was drawn. I got to see, though, that since my last visit to the area, what I can only describe as a temporal mural had been painted on one of the buildings at the end of my street, and I decided that I had to revisit the site in person. What was really interesting to me about Google Street View is the program seems to present as if you are interacting with the space in a sort of pseudo-present moment. Yet the instant that the image is captured, it's of the past. It was sort of like weird, like instant, like sort of instantaneity that's not real, but is real. This interactive representation is an archive as well, and it's no longer something that would be considered of the present moment. The time machine also, like the time machine function also reinforces this feeling to me. In the interval between the Google car taking these pictures of the mural and me visiting in person, the wall appeared to have been tagged and buffed. And so, like, the images didn't even meet up together in that time anymore. I think this experience has been this sort of intersection between material and place and time, and the compression of that linear experience into something that exists perhaps all together, but maybe it's something that I'm only able to perceive in a linear fashion. This is the inception of the piece that I'm working on now, that bridges landscape and memory in a way, these perceptions of time.